It should have been the happiest day of my life. I stood there in my tuxedo, watching my daughter dance, feeling proud of the family we built. But then I overheard a whisper that stopped my heart cold. My wife was leaning in close to my best friend, confessing that all 5 of our children actually belonged to him. My vision blurred as I tried to process the betrayal. Before I could even react or stop her, she marched up to the stage and snatched the microphone from the DJ. The room went dead silent, and I braced myself for the words that would change our lives forever. The reception hall buzzed with laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. I stood near the edge of the dance floor and fiddled with the bow tie that felt a little too tight around my neck. Across the room, Emily moved effortlessly in her white gown, spinning slowly in the arms of her new husband. It was a moment every father dreams about, and everything seemed absolutely perfect. I just wanted to soak in every second of this beautiful night. The upbeat pop track finally faded out, and the crowd erupted in enthusiastic applause for the young couple. A few moments later, the DJ smoothed the transition into a soulful ballad that signaled a change in the evening's mood. Couples began drifting onto the floor to join the bride and groom under the soft, twinkling lights. The atmosphere grew warmer and more intimate as the melody filled the large banquet hall. My throat felt dry after all the earlier toasts and greetings. I stepped away from the dance floor and navigated through the crowded tables toward the back of the room. The line at the open bar was surprisingly short, which was a stroke of luck. I needed something cold to drink before I made my rounds to thank the remaining guests. It was the only time all night I had a moment to myself. As I waited for the bartender to pour my drink, I scanned the room for my wife. I finally located Sarah standing over by a secluded corner table near the emergency exit. She wasn't alone, though. Mark, my best friend since college, stood right beside her. It struck me as odd that they were tucked away so far from the main festivities. They usually preferred to be right in the center of the action. Their body language immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Sarah leaned in toward him, closing the physical gap between them in a way that felt too intimate. Mark looked down at her with an intensity that did not match the celebratory vibe of the wedding. They were definitely having a serious conversation that they did not want anyone else to hear. I abandoned my spot at the bar to get a closer look. Curiosity got the better of me as I moved stealthily across the carpeted floor. I needed to know what could possibly be so urgent during our daughter's reception. Instead of walking directly up to them, I took a roundabout path along the wall. I made sure to keep my footsteps light and my presence unnoticed. If there was a problem, I wanted to know about it before I announced my presence. A massive display of white lilies and hydrangeas provided the perfect cover for me to stop and listen. I positioned myself just behind the tall vase, shielded completely from their line of sight. From this vantage point, I was only a few feet away from where they stood huddled together. My heart started to beat a little faster in my chest. I held my breath, hoping that neither of them would turn around. Sarah looked around the room nervously before she made her next move. She reached out and placed her hand softly on Mark's forearm, a gesture that looked far too familiar. Then she stood up on her tiptoes to bring her lips right next to his ear. The noise from the music covered most of the sound, but she spoke clearly enough for me to catch the words. I strained my ears to catch the secret. The words that drifted over the flowers hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Sarah confessed to Mark that he was the biological father of every single one of our 5 children. She said it with such certainty that there was no room for misunderstanding. My entire world seemed to tilt on its axis in that split second. I stood there trying to comprehend how my entire life could be a lie. Shock pinned me to the spot behind the floral arrangement. Sarah pulled back from Mark and smoothed down the front of her dress as if nothing groundbreaking had just happened. She turned her head and fixed her gaze directly on the DJ booth across the room. Her expression shifted from secretive to determined in a heartbeat. I wanted to scream, but my voice was completely trapped in my throat. The glass in my hand felt like it was about to shatter from how hard I was gripping it. That whispered confession played over and over in my mind, growing louder each time. My feet felt like lead blocks that refused to move an inch. I was a statue in a room full of dancing people, isolated by a devastating truth. The happy scene around me suddenly felt like a cruel joke. Sarah began to march purposefully toward the front of the room where the band was set up. Every step she took increased the panic rising in my chest. I knew she was going to make this private betrayal public. She was going to tear our family apart in front of everyone we knew and loved. I watched her go, helpless to stop the train wreck that was about to unfold. The thought of Emily's special day being ruined finally snapped me out of my trance. I forced my legs to move and stepped out from behind the flowers. I had to intercept Sarah before she could say another word into a microphone. This was supposed to be a celebration, not the venue for a family implosion. I started to pick up the pace, desperate to reach her before it was too late. Despite my effort to move, the shock anchored me to the floor before I could reach the dance floor. Paralyzed by the whisper I overheard, I watched her take the stage and snatch the microphone directly from the DJ. I was absolutely terrified. She was about to publicly destroy our family and ruin our daughter's wedding. The nightmare was unfolding right in front of my eyes, and I was powerless to stop it. A sharp feedback screech pierced the air, causing the music to cut out instantly. The sudden silence was jarring compared to the festive noise from just moments ago. Every single guest stopped what they were doing and turned their heads toward the stage. The confusion in the room was palpable as everyone waited to see what was happening. All eyes were glued to my wife, who stood center stage. I tried to shout her name, but the sound died in my throat. I managed to drag my body forward another step, but it felt like walking through deep mud. The distance between us felt like miles instead of just across a dance floor. I waved my hand in a futile attempt to get her attention. I just needed her to look at me before she said anything irrevocable. Sarah ignored the crowd's confusion and focused entirely on the device in her hand. She tapped the microphone head twice, sending a dull thudding sound through the large speakers. It was a clear signal that she was about to make a speech. The feedback settled and the room grew so quiet you could hear a pin drop. She looked ready to deliver the news that would end my life as I knew it. I glanced back at the corner to see how Mark was reacting to this madness. To my surprise, he wasn't looking for an exit or hiding his face in shame. He stood exactly where Sarah had left him, watching her with a bizarrely calm smile. He looked like a man who was proud rather than guilty. His reaction only added to the confusion swirling in my mind. On the dance floor, Emily had stopped swaying with her husband. She let go of his hand and looked up at her mother with wide, bewildered eyes. This interruption was clearly not part of the wedding itinerary she had planned so significantly. She looked around the room, hoping for an explanation that wasn't coming. Her vulnerability broke my heart, and I hated that her mother was doing this. Sarah gripped the microphone stand with both hands and took a long, stabilizing breath. She scanned the crowd, her eyes finally locking briefly with mine. There was no malice in her gaze, only a strange intensity that I couldn't place. She opened her mouth and her voice boomed through the speakers. The tension in the room was so thick it was suffocating. I braced myself for the impact. She started by talking about the struggles we faced 25 years ago trying to conceive. Then she dropped the bombshell that I was infertile and that we had needed help. She revealed that Mark was the anonymous donor who had stepped up to help us. The room gasped, but it wasn't the confession of an affair I had expected. She was talking about a medical arrangement, not a betrayal. Tears glistened in her eyes as she turned her attention toward the back corner of the room. She publicly thanked Mark for the incredible gift of family he had given us all those years ago. She explained that without his selflessness, our 5 beautiful children wouldn't be here today. It was a tribute to his generosity, not a declaration of love. The context of the whisper shifted instantly. Sarah turned back to the crowd and pointed directly at me where I stood frozen. She told everyone that while biology played a part, I was the one who raised them. She affirmed to the crowd that I was their true dad in every way that mattered. She wanted the world to know that fatherhood was about love, not just DNA. The fear in my chest evaporated instantly. The silence broke as the guests erupted into a thunderous round of applause and cheers. The tension that had gripped the room replaced itself with warmth and admiration. I felt my knees actually go weak from the overwhelming wave of relief that washed over me. I wasn't losing my family, I was being celebrated by them. I had completely misunderstood the entire situation. I found the strength to move and walked straight up the stairs to the stage. Sarah opened her arms and I pulled her into a tight embrace. Happy tears streamed down my face as I held the woman I loved more than anything. We stood there together, surrounded by our children and friends, stronger than ever before. It really was the happiest day of my life.